All right, guys, welcome back. It's time to cover lesson number 2. As you can see here, this lesson is called vSAN Performance Monitoring. So what we're going to be talking about here is a service called the Performance Service. And again, this service has been around for a while. And for the last few versions, this service has been enabled. In the old days, the service was not enabled by default. But again, in 6.7 and 7.0, this service is automatically enabled. And although you could disable it, we don't recommend you do that. Here you see the goals of this particular module. And again, we're going to be talking about how to monitor what's going on when it comes to your cluster, your hosts, and also the VMs. What we're talking about here in particular is the ability to take a look at really pretty charts that will show you what's going on at the vSAN level. Now, I'm going to be doing demos once again. And if you take a look, right, we're going to go through this chapter and understand what exactly is the performance service. But if you take a look, before we start with that, we have this extra page. And notice this page is called vSAN Online Performance Diagnostics. So, when you look at this page, let's take a look at exactly what they're showing here. And you can see they're saying that the vSAN Online Performance Diagnostics tool collects performance data and once again sends it to VMware for us to analyze. That again is, for example, how we make our products better. So when you take a look here, right, we show you exactly how to use this feature. But again, the bulk of the chapter deals with the performance service. And that's what we show you here. So we've had this for many, many years. We didn't have this back in the old days. I'm talking about back in 5.5, update 1 or 6.0. But again, if you've been working vSAN, let's say from 6.5, 6.7, or even 7X, you've seen this service. As I mentioned, this service now has been enabled for a while. And what this service does is it gives you more exposure to what's going on when it comes to your vSAN cluster. If you look at this capture, here once again you can see that this service is enabled. You can click on edit and you can technically disable it. Don't do that. It's just not a good idea. Now the cool thing about this performance service is that it stores information, but it doesn't store that information in the database of the vCenter. Instead, it stores that information in an object. That object is inside of the vSAN data store. And that object is called the StatsDB object. By default, that object is a two-way mirror. But if you want, you can say, gee, I want that object, for example, to be something else, like RAID 5. Now, when you take a look, here you can see that that object has a UUID. And once again, in this case, you can see that everything looks good. This object is a two-way mirror. It's using the default policy. You can see again, when it comes to compliance, it says compliant. That means no absent components or anything like that. And other than that, notice you have something called verbose mode, which is never enabled by default. So if you take a look, all we try to show you here is that this particular service will capture and show you all sorts of traffic. So with vSAN, we have what we call front-end traffic, and we also have back-end traffic. Now here they try to tell you and explain the difference between front-end VM traffic and again back-end traffic. Now when you look at the statements on the left side, you can see they're trying to tell you, number one, when I'm talking about front-end storage traffic, this is the traffic generated by your virtual machines. This is your VM IO traffic. Now, when we're talking about back-end storage traffic, as you can see here, we're talking about, for example, additional activity that is taking place potentially because of a resync operation or because of the actual replication of your VMs. Remember, after all, if your VM is a two-way mirror, you're writing the data twice. If your VM, of course, is RAID 5, you're writing the data, right, to 4 different hosts. So that's what we're talking about backend traffic. And when you take a look, what we try to show you here is that when it comes to the performance service, you have pretty performance related charts at the cluster level, at the host level, and also at the VM level. Now notice here you can see when it comes to performance, you have different tabs. For example, you have one for VMs, one for backend, and one for something called IO Insight, which again is fairly new, and you're going to get to play with that in the lab. Now, this, as you can see, is an example of what you expect to see when you look at this performance-related charts. So we're talking about charts related to IOPS, charts related to throughput. And as you can see also, right, we're talking about charts that will show you, for example, read and write latency as well. And again, we have all sorts of charts. Please pay attention to the demo if you never use this feature. So when you take a look, here we're showing you examples of different types of charts. Once again, if I go back to the previous page where we're talking about cluster level metrics for VMs, here again we're talking about backend cluster level metrics. So if you take a look, remember you can actually compare different charts in order to truly understand what is being generated by the VMs and what is being generated by additional routines taking place simultaneously. So once again, when you look at this particular page, notice it says throughput comparison, and it says compare the charts for the throughput metric of VMs and the backend. Now, in this page, we introduce a feature called IO Insight. So we're talking about vSAN IO Insight. And you get to actually play with this in the lab. In my demo, we'll do a demo. And again, remember here our VMs don't necessarily have an OS, so don't expect to see much. But when you look at the statement on the left side, it says IO Insight captures IO traces from ESXi and generates metrics that represent the storage IO behavior for a particular VM at the VMDK level. So the idea here is simple. Using the vSphere client, you decide whether you want to analyze one VM or potentially more than one VM. And to use IO Insight, you have to create a new instance. You tell the system how long to run for, and then again, when it's done, it will tell you exactly what's going on. So if you take a look, here they're showing you that they're creating a new instance. And notice the duration. Here they're saying, I want you to have these VMs, right, obviously run for X number of minutes. And in this case, after 10 minutes, show me what has been happening. Now, when you click on the expanders for these ESXi hosts, as I mentioned earlier, you could choose all of your VMs, or again, maybe just a handful. As soon as you select your VMs, you click on Finish. And again, notice it tells you this test, right, this instance will start immediately. If you go with 10 minutes, after 10 minutes, you can view the results. And if you take a look, here we show you how to do that. So notice, once you create the instance, and again, we capture that IO, you have the chance to view the metrics, or if you want to, rerun that instance a second time to see if anything has changed. Or one of the things you may want to do once you're done is simply delete them. Now, here you have an example of charts that you may see at the host level. Remember, you can see charts at the cluster level, at the host level, and at the VM level. So if you look at this example, you can see here we're choosing a host. And the host is, in this case, saesxi01.vclass.local. Remember, all you have to do is, in this case, select the host and go to the Monitor tab. And when you go to the Monitor tab, you click on Performance, and then you get to choose exactly what you want to see. So notice, in this case, we're showing you that if you select disks, you can say, show me what has been happening, and then you can be very specific. You could choose one of your many disk groups if you have more than one. And once again, you can say, I want you to show me what happened in the last 1 hour, or potentially 24 hours, and so on. Just like that, I want you to notice we have other tabs. So you can also see what happens, for example, for the VM NIC that we use for vSAN. So notice again, you have a tab there for physical adapters, for host networking, and so on. And if you take a look, once again, all sorts of charts are available to you. So in this case, we're talking about the cache tier. Remember, every disk has one and only one cache device. And once again, you can see all sorts of information. One of the things you want to make sure you don't have is congestion. So if you take a look, here we're talking about the write buffer. Now, I would suggest that you spend a few minutes and definitely take a look at what is available to you. You can see here we're showing you additional charts. And in this case, these are charts related to our resync operation. Now, if you take a look at the actual charts on the right side, you can see that we have pretty charts related to resync IOPS, resync throughput, and so on. Now, once again, I would suggest if you've never used this, to pay close attention to my demos. And I'm going to show you different charts available once again at the cluster, host, and VM level. I also mentioned that it's not just about the disks, it's also about the network. Remember, all of the data flows through the vSAN network. So you want to make sure, for example, that you're not dropping packets, that you're having good performance, and so on. Here, we're selecting a VM. So in this case, notice we're not selecting the cluster. We're not selecting a host. We're just picking one VM. This VM is SAVM01. Once again, you select the VM, you go to monitor, and then you go to performance. And one of the things that you could do is take a look at charts for individual disks. So if your VM has, let's say, a boot drive and an application drive, you can say, show me what has been happening with the application drive. And once again, you can choose your time range. As you can see here, they're choosing 1 hour, which is the default. And again, they're selecting, in this case, the first virtual disk. On that note, in a minute, I will see you again while I'm doing a demo. And again, I'm going to show you all sorts of charts available. Hopefully, again, you enjoyed that presentation. And remember, when it comes to performance, this would be the easiest way to take a look at what's going on. In the old days, I'm talking about back in 5.5 and 6.0, before we had this performance service, we used to have to rely on another tool called vSAN Observer. The drawback of vSAN Observer was that it had to be, number one, enabled through the Ruby vSphere console, and number two, it consumed a lot of resources on the vCenter. This, instead, doesn't do that. And again, it does not store the results on the database of the vCenter. It actually stores them in an object. So this also stores historical data. And the vSAN Observer never did. So this is definitely much better. That's why I'm telling you not to ever disable it. Thank you, guys.